it's almost always the higher frequency group that wins out if there is a winner. And there is essentially zero evidence in favor of bro splits or body part splits. And this sounds absolutely ludicrous.
Menno Henselmans is one of the most evidence-driven minds in hypertrophy, known for challenging gym stereotypes and updating recommendations as the research evolves.
Reps in reserve, what's the approach?
I usually recommend that people don't leave any reps in reserve. People dramatically overestimate how hard they generally train.
The way you do the splits, the nutrition also has changed over time?
Protein requirements. There have been a couple of new studies and meta-analyses that have slightly shifted my protein recommendations upward. If someone really wants to absolutely make sure they don't leave a gram of muscle on the table, it's more like 2.1 or the good old 1 gram per pound. People with higher energy surpluses, they mostly just gain more fat.
I guess it's just really hard to try and pinpoint the sweet spot. What advice would you give to those people to try and find the sweet spot?
Yeah, typically
Today on our Hack You podcast, our guest is Menno Henselman. He's someone who completely changed the way fitness industry thinks about hypertrophy and fat loss. Menno Henselman is one of the leading evidence-based coaches on the planet. He's a researcher, educator, and who trains the athletes based on what's really proven. If you care about strength, performance, and training smarter, not just harder, this is a conversation you're going to want to pay attention to.
Menno is one of the people who I look up to the most in terms of the things which he's publishing, the information that he knows. I spoke to him pretty much this time last year on the First Things First podcast. That was amazing, learned a lot. And even then, there was still a whole load of questions which I didn't even get to ask him. So I'm looking forward to once again sitting down with him in person and seeing what's changed over the past year and asking some of those questions which I didn't get to ask last time.
While speaking to Menno, his approach is that you always need to be open to the latest science and latest research. What has changed, what he has adapted, even if it's just incremental. We talked about training splits, full body versus body parts. We talked about volume. We talked about duration, impact, the real things and the real impact on hypertrophy, the maximum gains. But also, is it really right what the modern bodybuilders are doing? Or did the people 20, 30, 40 years ago with less data and less research actually had a better and more efficient approach? And the answer might surprise you.
What's up, guys, and welcome back to Hack You podcast with special guest Menno Henselmans. How you doing?
Good. How are you?
All good. All good. It's good to have a three-way conversation in person, finally.
Finally, Menno, welcome to Dubai.
Good to be here.
So, first question I have for you is, who should we be listening to in the health and fitness industry that's actually giving good advice?
Now, let me preface this by saying I mostly read original scientific research, so I don't follow a lot of people, and most of the people I follow are more kind of a little bit of the old guard in evidence-based fitness. But I like Greg Nuckols, Eric Helms, Brad Schoenfeld, Alan Aragon, Beth Contreras. He's very much in the glute niche, but he's very good in that niche. Those are the people I follow the most. So they're very into the evidence. I like Greg Nuckols a lot because he publishes very original thoughts, and I appreciate that a lot. So he's very much pioneer. And there are a lot of people in evidence-based fitness who are more consensus thinkers. And that's also good if you just want the consensus thoughts. But especially for me in my field, I really want to know what are the latest up-to-date ideas. And I like Greg Nuckols a lot. Even though he doesn't publish a lot, he has very original ideas.
Yeah.
When you say your field, can you give the audience a little bit of background on yourself? What is the expertise and what are you trying to find out more about? Because if the creativity and the originality is so important to you, what is the thought process behind your personal path?
Yes. Evidence-based fitness. So it's the serious lifters mostly that are interested in optimizing their physique and health. It's very much my core niche. And now that as I've gotten more popular, it's also expanded more to health, fitness in general. And my original background in that comes from Bayesian thinking. In fact, I originally had a brand called Bayesian Bodybuilding, but then it turned out nobody knew what Bayesian meant. And bodybuilding was like, ew, people in thongs on stage. So not a good marketing angle. But the idea is still very much the same. The Bayesian thinking is basically that you update your beliefs in the most rational way, based on the current knowledge that is available. And every little new study is a new piece of the puzzle. And all the data, also anecdotal data, you take everything and you weigh it depending on how much it's worth, and you form a belief, a model of the world based on how things work. And I got a lot of statistical and scientific knowledge from my education that I could use a lot in this realm. And that's also why I started in fitness to begin with, that I thought, I could contribute here because fitness, especially when I got into it over 10 years ago now, it was still very much, I have the bigger bicep, so you should listen to me, and that's why I'm right.
So when you say your thought process change over time, the more data you have, so that does also mean that your approach, so in terms of the way you do the splits, the nutrition, also has changed over time?
Absolutely. It's incremental. And especially now for a lot of areas where we have a lot of research, it's unlikely to change majorly. But for example, protein requirements, there have been a couple of new studies and meta-analyses that have slightly shifted my protein recommendations upward for people really interested in absolutely maximizing muscle growth. And as the data change, my opinions will also change.
So beforehand, you were saying like 1.6 to 1.7, you would say a little bit more.
I've always recommended 1.8 as a default.
Yeah.
And it's still the default I can recommend. But if someone really wants to like absolutely make sure they don't leave a gram of muscle on the table, it's more like 2.1 or the good old 1 gram per pound.
Yeah.
I would recommend.
Yeah. Which is interesting because I think we had 4 different guests, including Andy Galpin, Lane Norton. So everybody agrees it's above 1.6. From an evidence perspective, the interesting part is what they're saying is actually the older you get, the more you need. So it's not just from a muscle growth perspective, but also from an age perspective that you need more protein. But I think at 2.1, 2.2, you're the winner so far. You went the highest. Is that for muscle hypertrophy? Is it for support? Where do you see a max?
So the 1.8 is more of a general recommendation for health, someone who wants to be healthy and fit. 1.6 will honestly cover you in the most scenarios. And it's worth noting that there isn't a single well-controlled, randomized controlled trial that finds significant benefits in that trial of more than 1.6. So we're really talking about extrapolating from all the studies together, meta-analyses. Like, we don't find it in this study, but if you look at all the studies together, there is a bit of a trend there that we see benefits to higher intakes. That's what we're talking about. So yeah, when you go up to 2.2, 1 gram per pound, you're really talking about bodybuilders, the high volume training that want to absolutely maximize muscle growth.
And the studies have been done on those.
There have been studies on those, and they don't find significant benefits within those studies, but a bit of a trend if you put all the studies together.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there anything in particular since we last spoke? We did a podcast probably about this time last year. Has there been any new studies published which have changed your opinion on anything specifically? Anything
so the protein intake a little bit. Fasted training is less harmful than I thought. We did one of our own studies as well with Andy Galpin, actually, we were talking about before. And I thought it would be more of a proof of principle study. Like for sure, fasted training would be worse. And we did find worse strength gains in the fasted training group, but muscle growth was actually not impaired. And another study came out this year from another research group that found very similar results. And they also found non-impaired strength gains. So that's where my views have also shifted with the evidence. I still believe, again, if you want to maximize muscle growth, you should not train fasted. We also have research, and we found that in our study as well, that performance was a little bit impaired when people were training fasted, especially higher volume training. But it's not really that big of a deal. So for the average person that really hates eating anything in the morning before they lift, they're content with just reducing energy intake. That's their primary goal. And eating more before the gym would increase their energy intake. Could be fine. I would say try to get some protein in. Maybe, 15 grams of carbs is what I often recommend. But definitely don't need more than that. And you can shift most of the calories to later in the day. And if you really want to train fasted, it really isn't as big of a deal as I thought it would.
Yeah. So you're saying it doesn't harm muscle growth, but it can impair performance.
Yes. And I think long-term that would impair muscle growth, but it seems that the performance impairment is so small that you're talking about it's like reverse creatine almost. It's like you lose a few reps, especially in the later sets. And that effect alone will not make a difference in a 6 to 8 week study.
Yeah.
But if you extrapolate that little bit of performance difference and that also reduces strength gains over the long term, I do think that muscle growth eventually will be impaired.
So it's not weeks, it's years almost.
Probably, yeah.
Interesting part about fasted. I was very interested in all those studies because I lifted fast in the morning. And when we discussed protein intake, which is prior, I think consensus is out that protein intake per meal is not as important as protein intake per day. But if you do train fasted, that protein right after the workout becomes way more important than it would be if you wouldn't eat beforehand. Would you agree with that?
Yes. So the whole pre-post workout thing, it's more about when the nutrients are in the blood and your body has what's called an anabolic window, which is not like the anabolic peephole of 1 hour after the workout, but it's actually like it's the process of muscle growth after the workout. So it can last days. And that's the period, especially the first hours after the workout, in which muscle protein synthesis can be elevated to a much higher extent than at other times. Technically, this is called delayed muscle fullness. And during this time, it is extra important to consume a high protein intake. Now, you don't need to consume the protein at that moment because you could also have it pre-workout, and then the amino acids will still be in the blood. So when you're doing the workout, and especially post-workout, you want to be in a state of hyperaminoacidemia. You want the amino acids to be available, and you want enzymes like mTOR to look around basically and say, oh, so we have a stimulus from strength training to build muscle, and we also have the amino acids, there's high insulin levels, very anabolic environment, maximum muscle growth.
Mm-hmm. You changed your approach, right, over time? So where are you at right now?
So I will sometimes train fasted if I have to train very early, because there's nothing worse for me when I train just after eating.
Yeah.
Like I need at least an hour, maybe even more, particularly if I'm training legs, for that meal to settle a little bit. What I have noticed is I could actually have a really good fasted training session if I have stuffed my face the evening before.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
If the previous evening has been a very substantial meal, then that means my performance is less impacted the following day, assuming that it's done relatively early in the morning. If I delay that fasted session to later on in the day, then I start to notice
meal including carbs
the night before.
Yeah, the night before.
Yeah, loads of carbs. Yeah. So glycogen levels are very replenished.
Exactly. So that's also what we found in our research on the carbs, which I'm now doing a lot of research on. The pre-workout carb intake is not nearly as important as how full your glycogen stores are. So if you top up your glycogen stores, which is the stored form of carbohydrate in your muscles, then the pre-workout carbohydrate is not that important anymore.
Yeah.
So that makes a lot of sense.
So you said 15 grams carbs beforehand. It's like an apple.
Yeah. And there's actually research that it might be more of a psychological effect. So there are some studies in which they give people placebo breakfast. And it's just a gel. So it's like this anamorphous gel structure that you eat. And some people actually get the gel with calories and other people the gel that doesn't have any calories. And then you see that actually they perform equally well, but they perform better than the people that don't eat the gel.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So there's clearly some mental component there as well. And there's also one study at least that found a satiety component. So when people feel hungry, they perform worse. And that fits with the research on emotional control, that any negative emotion, that's why we have the concept of hangry. Any negative emotion is like willpower draining. And going to the gym obviously costs willpower. So if you're already in a state, sleep deprived, hangry, whatever, where you don't feel well, then people have a harder time pushing themselves in the gym.
Now that you speak about carbs, because we speak mostly about protein on HackU, and it's great to bring it up. When I used to play sports in the past, there was a concept of carb-loading. And the carb-loading was not the night before. Carb-loading started like 3 days before. So if some of the soccer players would like on a Saturday game, they would on Thursday start eating the pasta. Do we have, and that's 20 years ago. So what do we know now about carb-loading approach and performance in that regards?
Yeah, we recently actually did a study on very high-level soccer players, and we found that carb-loading did improve performance, but that's specifically for soccer, where these days with professionals, they might literally empty the gas tank in terms of glycogen. There's even some research that before, maybe they would get like 50% depletion, but modern soccer players can actually hit something like 90% depletion in a soccer match, because they're so well conditioned that they just burn through the glycogen at amazing rates. So in those cases, it makes sense to like ultra top up, which is what you do with a carb load, to really make sure the glycogen stores are very filled. And bodybuilders can also use it to increase muscle size, because it makes your muscles bigger. They're literally more full, and you see that. You look more full.
In fact, they're more full because they hold more water?
Yeah, so every gram of glycogen attracts like 3 grams of water. So there's also a lot of water in there, but it's literally the muscle being more full. And I would even say that if you gain 2 kilos of water in glycogen, it looks more impressive than 2 kilos of muscle.
Yeah.
Because you get that full look, you know. That's also what you get with gear. Some people have that look, which you just have a hard time getting as a natty lifter, because they have that insane fullness and vascularity and everything.
So speaking of that, every time somebody questions Mike in regards to that, the people who push back on that is because he then doesn't have the gear look in terms of the puffiness, the fullness,
right?
Which is, he doesn't want to hear that, but it's a good thing. You don't look full enough to be on steroids.
But it's funny though, because someone actually said this yesterday, because I put a video up of me just training at the outdoor gym. And someone was like, "Oh yeah, no carbs for the win." And I was like, "No, I'm having a lot of carbs. Like I would not look like that if I was taking carbs out of my diet. Like it's one of the things you need to have that full look."
Absolutely, yeah. As you said,
it's like with a pump in a gym, especially on high carb diets. That's when as a natty you can approximate the gear status a little bit.
How quickly could you deplete glycogen stores as somebody just doing a normal workout?
It's much harder than most people think.
Yeah.
In research, there isn't a single documented case, including bodybuilders doing like 20 sets for a muscle group, of more than 40% depletion after a strength training workout. So, and this is per muscle group, right? It's because it's the glycogen in your biceps that you have to deplete before the biceps actually becomes impaired in performance. So you're talking about very, very high volume training. And funny enough, ironically, most people have the idea that full body workouts require more glycogen, more energy expenditure, because it feels a little bit more like cardio.
Yeah.
But actually, it's bro splits where you do a ton of volume for one muscle group. Those are the workouts that are likely to suffer the most if you are running low on carbs to begin with. Because if you're doing 15 sets for one muscle group, then that's the issue. If you do a full body workout, you might only do 3 sets for one muscle group, and then you're really not depleting anything.
Yeah. So intra-workout carbohydrate, probably not that necessary.
No, then you're really talking about endurance training lasting over an hour usually.
Yeah. But if you're fasted and carb and glycogen depleted in the first place,
I would say pre-workout is still better, because even if you take it intra-workout, it takes usually an hour or so before you get peak levels of glucose and everything in the blood. Right? So it's already kind of too late. Even pre-workouts technically is sort of too late for a lot of purposes.
You just killed 12% of the supplement market. All the intra-workout. Because I have intra-workout carbs at home. And I used my personal trainer used to recommend them a couple of years ago, and I drank it, but now, and I stopped, and I didn't feel any difference from stopping doing so. Yeah. But if you're saying 15 grams of carbs beforehand probably has a more psychological effect and performance effect, then the whole carbs pre-workout, intra-workout is completely pointless.
Yes.
But also what you're saying is if the maximum depletion we reach is 40% for a bodybuilder, if he does splits, then we're not really that important. But only thing my takeaway is if I didn't have carbs for a long time and I am fasted, I should probably do full body workouts in the gym.
Yeah, it's definitely less likely that you get any performance impairment.
You mentioned that there were some incremental changes in your overall approach and how you look through things, but the audience does not know what your initial baseline was. So from the audience perspective, they always want to know, based on your personal data, but also on the research you've seen, how should they approach every week? So what's, in your understanding, an ideal workout split? Because you're talking about bro splits and all that kind of stuff. What is the most efficient workout split for a person who might have the time, but doesn't want to overdo it if he doesn't have to?
Especially in that case, I would go with full body workouts. In fact, if you just look at the literature purely empirically in terms of which workout structure performs better than another, the research actually heavily leans in favor of full body workouts, because in every single comparison, with one very tentative study exception, if there is a difference, and usually there isn't, the difference is in favor of the higher frequency training. So purely from the results of studies, we can say that even if we don't look at mechanism or anything, then it's almost always the higher frequency group that wins out if there is a winner. And there is essentially zero evidence in favor of bro splits or body part splits. And this sounds absolutely ludicrous if you say, hey, bodybuilders should just train full body these days. But up until the 50s or so, everybody trains full body. And if you look at any other athlete group other than bodybuilders, they all train full body. So it's really just this one niche of bodybuilders that have this concept of body part splits that is very popular. But everyone else pretty much trains full body. And I think that is actually the most sensible way to structure most workouts, because it splits out the volume the most. So we see, if there's one thing that we've really seen in the research the last years, is that just total accumulated weekly volume is what matters most. And if you split your volume across the week the most, you get the most volume, because let's say you have 9 sets of bench presses on Wednesday normally. Now you're going to split them out over Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. 3 sets, 3 sets, 3 sets. How many reps are you going to do? More than if you do them all in that one session. And it's funny because people have this concept of, will I be recovered from my Wednesday workout on Friday? It's like, well, you'll be a lot more recovered than after you do set 9 after 8 sets that same session, because then that's the most fatigued state you could be in.
Yeah. You drastically limited the DOMs as well, if you're spreading it out like that.
Yes, which is a benefit, because high frequency training actually, in a few studies, there is a trend that even with the additional volume that you do, there is a slightly improved recovery capacity trend. So there's also an increase in some studies in the testosterone to cortisol ratio. There is less muscle soreness. And in one study, at least, the measure of muscle damage was also lower when they split the workout up into 2 sessions on the same day.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a bit of a trend that if you don't do a heinous amount of damage to muscles, they have an easier time recovering from a little bit of damage more frequently than from like heinous amount of damage and then a week of recovery.
Yeah, I have people who say to me, "Oh, I don't like training legs because I just hate being sore and not being able to walk for a few days." And I just say, "Well, maybe don't go and annihilate your legs in one session. Just do 1 or 2 exercises and then just do that a couple of times per week."
Yes, legs have it in particular because it's also so mentally demanding.
Yeah.
And if you look at it from an effort perspective rather than a volume perspective, leg day is so much more challenging than any other day of the week. You have arm day, but you have leg day. It's like, yes, they're both limbs, but that's really where the similarity ends because leg day is absolute brutality and arm day is like stroll in the park. Oh, you get a nice pump.
Yeah.
When you say winner, just for the audience perspective, the winner in terms of winner, I have more progress on my strength or also hypertrophy?
Also hypertrophy. Yeah.
Okay, hypertrophy.
For strength, the data is even more clear. For strength, it's now reasonably well established that there are benefits to training exercises more frequently because for strength, it's about the exercise frequency. And for muscle hypertrophy, it's about the frequency per muscle group.
So real quick just to simplify it, 6 times a week, 45 minutes is better or more efficient than 3 times a week for an hour and a half.
Basically, yes. Especially in that scenario when you're also going to the gym more frequently. But even if you're going to the gym 6 times a week anyway, if you do 6 days where you have a different body part every day of the week, versus 6 days full body, I would put my money on 6 days full body.
Okay, now comes the question. Okay, I don't want to do 6 days. Is 4 days better than 2 days? Like, where's the minimum amount?
So I think after 2 days, you get sharply diminishing returns. Okay. And we also see that in the research. When you train a muscle group at least twice a week, if you train it even more frequently, the benefits diminish a lot. Yeah. And the benefits are mostly equal to the additional repetition volume that you get, right? Because if you don't get any additional repetition volume, research is very clear that there are essentially no benefits.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I've seen some studies that are stating that there isn't really a huge amount of benefits past training a muscle group 2 to 3 times per week.
That's true. Yes. Because if you already split a conventional amount of volume over 3 sessions, and then you split that volume over 6 sessions, you get maybe 1 or 2 repetitions extra in some of the sessions. Mm-hmm. But especially if someone is already at a good volume, you're at that slope of the volume curve where it's very, very sharply diminishing returns. It's like, you increase your volume from 24 sets per week to 26. Do you get a lot of additional gains? Well, you probably get something on average in the research, but it's very, very little.
Yeah. Is there any top performing competitor that is doing full body?
Because athletes of pretty much all realms, gymnasts.
No, but I'm talking about like Olympia. Yeah.
Probably. I'm not sure. It's very not.
I've never.
It's not commonly done.
It's funny. A lot of the people who I've trained with a high level, they still love doing the bro split.
Yes.
And because it's been so long since I've done a bro split, when I train with them and do a bro split, for example, like with Ryan Terry, we just did shoulders. My delts are just not even conditioned to do that amount of volume in one session. Because it's been a very long time since I've done that. And literally after 20 minutes of the session, I was like, I'm pretty much done. Everything after this is garbage.
Yes.
But Ryan is obviously, he's conditioned his body to tolerate that amount of volume. I mean, his delts look great. Mm-hmm. Like, you can't argue with that. But sometimes need to just shut my mouth because these guys are Olympia winners. I'm like, who am I to tell you? But I'm like, I'm pretty sure if you maybe switch things around a little bit, like, who knows what you could look like and what the recovery would be like. It'd be a lot better, surely.
Mm-hmm. But they don't want to risk it because they reached the position where they are, like, with that approach, and everybody else is doing that. So they're like, what if it doesn't work out? And they have like this limited amount of in the career to be at that peak where they are today. So if we establish now the full body and let's call it more than 2 times a week, now comes the question that we're also, one of my favorite replies is, how many reps should you do? Anywhere between 5 to 30 is a good range. And I'm like, that doesn't help the audience. Mm-hmm. So if
Brad was saying that, wasn't he?
Everybody's like, hey, between 5 to 30 works. But from the audience perspective, when I say that, they're like, that's not an answer that I can live with. Mm-hmm. So the question comes to intensity, and intensity comes to the point of, reps in reserve. So if we do those sets, how many sets we established? Now, in terms of inside of the sets from a repetition perspective, what's the approach?
With repetitions in reserve?
Yes.
I usually recommend that people don't leave any reps in reserve. And that's because
You're the first one.
Yeah, I don't recommend that people train to failure, like intentionally hitting failure. But I think people dramatically overestimate how hard they generally train.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of research on this.
Okay.
One of the latest meta-analyses found that the average gym goer, and this is not people listening to this podcast probably, but the average gym goer leaves like 6 to 7 reps in reserve during most of their sets, which is essentially a warm-up set for us, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like imagine your work
Okay,
set.
if you say average, I agree with you. But I also agree with you that the audience is not the average gym goer.
Mm-hmm.
I think the audience is who, when they say reps in reserve and you go to failure, is like where they can't get the weight up by themselves.
Yeah. So don't try to actually hit failure, but you should hit it occasionally, because if you never hit failure, then you should also question if you're really 1 rep to failure,
Yeah.
But for most people, I think not leaving reps in reserve is the easiest to track. Just doing as many reps as you can. And research also finds that the more reps you leave in reserve, the more inaccurate you get. Right? 5 reps in reserve becomes very difficult, right?
Mm-hmm.
Seeing that far into the future, basically. 1 rep in reserve, okay, pretty doable. 2 reps in reserve, then you typically see that most people underestimate how many more they can do by at least 1. So most people, even powerlifters, well-trained athletes.
So 2 turns 3.
Yeah, they could do 1 extra rep if you really push them compared to what they thought.
Yeah.
And that gets worse as you get further and further away from failure. And there's not really a reason for most people that are not pushing the volume up to crazy levels to leave a lot of reps in reserve, unless they're powerlifters and they're training primarily for strength. For muscle hypertrophy, all the additional volume that you do, it still counts.
Mm-hmm.
It's still good additional volume. It's the most time efficient. So the easiest approach is just not leave any reps in reserve, but don't intentionally seek out failure if you're on a high volume training program.
Yeah, that's because I find it hard not pushing to failure.
Mm-hmm.
Like if I'm going to do my set, I want to do it.
But you do it
hard
on every
until-
set or on the last
Well,
set?
this is the thing. Back in the day, I would typically do 3 working sets per exercise, and I would be pushing to failure on every single one of those sets. And I did notice that I was wiped out after a session.
Yeah.
And sometimes, recovery, particularly if I did it with legs, it'd be days before the soreness would go away. So what I noticed is there's 2 options. Either I hold back a little bit when doing those working sets, assuming I was doing 3 working sets per exercise, or I take away one of those sets and I do 2 working sets, but I go hardcore on those 2 working sets. And that approach worked way better for me.
Yeah, so most research finds it's the total repetition volume that's most important. So you can indeed do fewer sets closer to failure, or more sets and then a bit further away from failure.
So in that case, it's better for him to do 3 sets.
No, 2.
No.
Oh.
You just said that.
Either 2 very hard or 3 less hard.
Exactly.
So you can get
Exactly.
similar results, yeah.
But then, so this is an interesting question to ask a beginner, because beginners don't really know what failure is, and should they even be going to failure, because they haven't mastered the execution of performing these exercises.
Yeah, but
So
they're also too weak to injure themselves often.
Yeah, there's that as well.
That's a real thing.
Yeah.
That's like a real issue with the stronger you get, the easier it becomes to injure yourselves, because the ratio of force production to the tendon size in particular decreases or increases a lot as you get stronger. So you become a lot more efficient at producing force, but your connective tissues, your tendons and the like, they don't keep up quite to the same extent.
Yeah.
That's why if you do 1 really bad rep with a deadlift, you might instantly feel it. In a beginner, you see them in the gym and you're like, how are they not injured already? Well, it's because the force production is just not high enough to injure a ligament.
Yeah.
Speaking about that, what's your take on machine versus free weights then? Because machines are considered to be more safe, so maybe something more appropriate for beginners. But then what I've seen recently, and maybe that's because I started doing this more and more, there's now more and more bodybuilders coming out working with the Smith machine for bench presses, because the tension
squats
stays
as
on.
well.
Squats is there. And I'm like, it feels like for the first time in my 20 years of weightlifting, it switches over to machines predominantly. What's your take on that?
So in most research, it doesn't matter for muscle hypertrophy. And for strength, you just get better at what you're doing. So if you want to use machines, then you get better at machines mostly. And free weights have a bit of better carryover in that sense, because with a machine, you don't learn the coordination as much. But if you're just doing it for muscle hypertrophy, for bodybuilding purposes, then you can use machines. It's perfectly fine. I wouldn't say they're safer though. The technique is not that much of an issue, I think. And it's also really good to learn the correct technique. If you're using machines because you can't have good technique without them, I think you should not use machines. Like first, just like with squats, first learn how to actually squat, then start thinking about putting a belt on, shoes and everything. But I would really like to see that someone can first squat without any accessories before they start using a lot of other gear, because it can become a crutch quite easily.
Yeah. The stabilization issue can get to a point where it limits how much load you can lift. And something I've noticed, for example, Bulgarian split squat,
Yeah.
like the amount of effort and coordination it takes to just balance yourself ends up limiting how much you can actually lift.
Yes.
So a lot of the time now, you'll see me, I'll just do it in a Smith machine because I don't need to stabilize that bar. It's like up or down. That's the only way it can go.
So you can increase the weight more on the machines. In that case, it's actually better for hypertrophy.
So interestingly, the stability is still your muscles working.
Yeah.
And research has quite conclusively found now that it takes a very large amount of instability, more than a split squat. You would be talking about a split squat on a Bosu ball or something before it actually impairs muscle hypertrophy. But the effort increase is very real. So you're basically having to put in more effort to get the same growth stimulus. And that's why I also, with a reverse lunge or something, like, I don't want to do that. Like, just do it in a Smith machine.
Yeah, the thought of it is like, oh, God.
Yeah, because it's already a brutal exercise, and I have no particular interest in becoming good at splits or lunges or anything. So just do it in a split.
So exercise-wise, and this is also, I think, good for beginners, what are some of the exercises that people overrate in terms of hypertrophy and they should probably not be doing because they could do something else instead?
Probably the most overrated one is the traditional deadlift, because it's a lot less out of favor now, but it used to be that you could not even say this. You know, one of the power lifts, they are the GOAT, that they are the best lifts. And the deadlift is a great, it's like a jack of all trades lift. So it's not a master of any particular muscle group. Like for no muscle group is the deadlift like the ideal mass builder. It's just that you're stimulating a lot of muscle at the same time. So yeah, if you want to do one exercise, you're only 1 minute in the gym, a set of deadlifts will definitely have a lot of bang for your buck. But it's not ideal for your quads. It's not ideal for your hamstrings. It's not ideal for anything really. So I would say deadlifts in that sense are very overrated.
Is it also because of the injury prone exercise?
Yeah, I wouldn't say deadlifts are inherently injury prone, but they do put a lot of stress on a lot of connective tissues. And anecdotally, you do say that most back injuries are squats and deadlifts. Technique component is high. Cardiovascular component is high if you want to have good technique. And you do high repetitions in particular. You need to lower the weight very actively. Because if you're just dropping it, you don't have an eccentric muscle contraction. And that's also much worse for muscle hypertrophy. So there's like a lot of effort and things you have to do right for it not to be injurious, especially when you do high volume, high repetitions, more sets, etc.
When's the last time you did a deadlift?
Years ago, probably.
Years, right?
I would just stick to a Romanian or stiff leg deadlift.
Yeah, same.
Because at least there's more tension applied to either the glute or the hamstring.
Yeah, basically the only thing you lose is you take out the quads, but the quads are not stimulated very well anyway, then you're better off doing a squat.
Yeah.
And then you get much better stimulus for the whole posterior chain, especially the hamstrings and the glutes.
Yeah. I mean, the feedback I always got from professional teams is the risk was just not worth it. Like this exercise is not worth the exposure to injury, especially to your lower back. It's just not worth the upside compared to the other things you could be doing for the same muscle groups.
Yeah, and especially because you can do more controlled exercises. And they're like deadlifts aren't inherently injurious, but it's just that it's a brutal exercise. And if you're fatigued with the high stress on maintaining good technique, plus cardiovascular strain and training all of these muscle groups together, it's just easier for your technique to slip. And you're usually using heavy loads. And because they're not well suited to high repetitions, most people also do them heavy. And heavy lifting in general is more injurious in the sense of it's easier to get injured with a 1RM than a 10RM. So yeah, there's a lot of practical issues with deadlifts.
Do you know what I think is overrated as well? Doing any kind of seated row with the narrow grip.
Yeah.
Because the range of motion is just so restricted.
Yeah. I think rows in general are a little bit overrated especially for back, because they train like the whole back reasonably well, but
what type of row are you
ideal.
talking about? Which type of row do you mean?
Most horizontal type rows.
Okay.
Yeah, because
even a T-bar row.
Even a T-bar row, I would say, because for like the lats, when the elbow gets behind the body, then the lats are not really involved anymore. So if you're doing full range of motion, then the last part's not the lats, and the lats get you to like here, but you could still go all the way up doing like a pullover or a pull down movement. So for the lats, not really ideal, and also in the stretch position, there's very little tension. You know how you can do like 50 more reps by the time you can't touch your chest anymore, but you could just do like 50 more reps just progressively shorter. That's an issue for the lats in terms of them not getting a lot of tension at long muscle lengths.
So lat would be more.
Yeah, I was for lats. I program mostly pullovers, lat prayers, more vertical or diagonal type pulling movements. And then rows are good for the traps, but also not magical or anything. Because again, the tension at long lengths is not very high. And for biceps, obviously not great, especially dumbbell rows and the like. One study found that those types of rows where you have a free implement, it's like 50% of the growth of a biceps curl. So obviously not biceps builders.
Yeah.
The one thing that I just recently, so Jay Cutler did a podcast where he was basically saying how all the new generation bodybuilders are becoming lazy and only working out once a day, and that back in the day they would do 2 a days, and that just now everybody's just too lazy and too cute. And he's like, it's much better for you, and you get better results from that. But everybody nowadays stopped it for scientific reasons, or does Jay have a point?
I think Jay has a point, especially if you look at the top athletes. There are a few studies, mostly from Scandinavia, which found that elite athletes dividing their workout up into 2 a days did get better gains. And this is, for the average recreational lifter, going to the gym 2 times in 1 day is just not worth it.
Yeah.
But if you're really competing at the top level and you're doing super high volume training, there does seem to be a slight benefit in terms of recovery and a little bit of a benefit in terms of gains, mostly because you get higher quality work done and higher volume because of that.
Would this be like a 45-minute session or something?
Yeah, I mean, for elite athletes, it could be even more, but
would you split? Would you do 50% and 50%, and the second 50% you would be stronger because you had a break in between, or would you do 150% that day?
You could maybe push it up a little bit, but basically I would do 50-50, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's just the break gives you more power.
Exactly.
So
and that's why, we talk about frequency when it's 2 a days, but really at that point, it's almost a rest interval.
Yeah.
I had this. So here's a nice anecdote that I think really drives the point home of volume just being the key, regardless of how you distribute it. The gym owner of the first gym I went to, he ran the whole gym on his own. Huge guy, like enormously jacked. And I never saw him do a full workout because he never had the time. So he was in the gym from morning early until late at night, just doing everything. He was cleaning, he was repairing the equipment, never really had time for a workout. So he did literally 1 set at a time. He would when there were no customers, he would walk into the gym, do some biceps curls, go help a customer. He had time for one thing, load up the leg press, do 1 set, and there's someone else, or you have to repair some equipment. He has to do that. He would just basically do only 1 set at a time. And he got ultra jacked doing that. So obviously it's an anecdote, doesn't mean much other than that it can work. But researchers actually supported that approach can be very effective. The only practical issue is warming up.
Yeah.
He would be running around the whole day, so he'd be warm. But for most people, having to do a whole warm up for 1 set just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. It's interesting because I would sometimes get questions from people who have the most horrible working hours you can imagine, like doing a night shift or just literally working back to back for a 5-day period. And they realistically maybe only had 2 or 3 days when they could train.
Mm-hmm.
So I would always just say, well, just obviously prioritize those days when you do your hardest sessions. But you could say, well, maybe on those days where you're doing nothing, you could potentially split up workouts, and there could be 2 days where you do 4 sessions in that 2-day period, which would kind of counteract those 5 days when you don't do any sessions at all.
Yeah. And there have also been 2 or even 3 studies where they looked at specifically this structure where people only have 3 days, and they do their workout on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday versus Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So most people would split it up. And that's probably ideal. And there's also some research supporting that if you spread it out more across the week, because of the high repetition volume, you get slightly better gains. But in these studies specifically looking at the just Monday, Wednesday, Tuesday, back to back, they got basically equivalent gains.
Yeah.
So just getting the volume in is really the most important thing. And for those people, that's super reassuring. Maybe you only have the weekend, weekend warrior it's called now, right? You just get the volume in and you get the vast majority of your gains. Now, if you have the luxury of splitting it up, that's better.
Yeah.
But just total volume is number 1 determinant of your gains.
What you just mentioned in regards to the gym owner, there's also the studies coming out. I mean, hypertrophy-wise, when you do exercises, when you do the duration of the pause between the sets, let's say 90 minutes, 2 minutes, will actually, if you are still warm and stretched, 3 or 4 minutes might be more beneficial to you in that case. So actually taking an extra long break to do the extra 1 rep because you are not still, have no hangover from previously is beneficial to you. So the break can be longer.
Yes. In fact, that's one of the strongest evidence for that comes from one of the studies I co-authored with Brad Schoenfeld's lab, where we indeed found that longer rest intervals increased muscle growth, strength development, and then later research also confirmed that it increased muscle protein synthesis. And that's because of the additional repetition volume that you get.
Yeah.
So subsequent research has compared doing a few sets with longer rest intervals versus more sets with shorter rest intervals, but equating the number of repetitions. So you have to do more sets in that case because you're doing very short rest intervals. And then you get the same gains. So again, it comes out to total volume being the number one determinant, because in the end, it's just how much tension do you put on the muscle? What's the time under tension? And that's like the integrated total or accumulated tension curve, if you will. That's really the primary signal for muscle growth.
So for the person itself, just to understand this, you can take a longer break as long as you're mentally still capable of lifting heavy weights and you're still warm enough to not cause injury.
Yes.
So it might be 3 or 4 minutes. It shouldn't be more than that probably, but then your heart rate is too low and you might not be warm anymore. But that is actually more beneficial to you than trying to, after 90 seconds, go back. PTs do that. 90 seconds are over, come back in. And you're like, I'm like, I just did no reps in reserve. I'm completely still in that previous set mentally. There's no benefit to it.
Yes. Yeah, what I like to do is combo sets. So you would string up a bunch of exercises for unrelated muscle groups, maybe squat, chin up, overhead press. You could do those all in a squat rack often. And then you do one set of one. You do rest a bit. So it's not a superset. It's not a circuit. You do catch your breath. You do the other exercise. You do the other exercise. And then you go back to the squats. The end result of that is that your rest interval for the squats is probably 5+ minutes, which means your performance for the squats is going to be really good. And if you're decently well conditioned, then you can do this with maybe 1 minute rest interval, 2 minute rest intervals between even compound exercises. And the bonus is that it's very time efficient, but you also get the benefit of super long rest intervals. So you actually get really high performance output per unit of time.
The interval is super long because you're not only just taking the break because you have two other exercises in between you do the round. Yeah,
exactly. Because you also have the time it takes to do your actual chin-up set, then the rest from your chin-up set to your overhead press set, the time it takes to your overhead press set, etc.
You just decide to take the most difficult exercises and let's do a little bit of squat, chin-up, and then in the overhead press. Yeah.
That's definitely a harder combo set.
I mean, that's if you tell me what's the 3 most difficult exercises for me personally, following up a squat with chin-ups is probably up there.
Yeah, it's one of those weird things where the more advanced of a lifter you are, the better you are at gauging how much rest you need.
Yes.
Because there's sometimes where I would usually have like a similar rest period after doing a compound lift, and then for whatever reason, one might just completely take it out of me, and I'd be like, normally I go back to the second set, but I'm still recovering.
Yeah, it's very individual. Yeah, I noticed that now that I start martial arts and I do way more cardio, my conditioning has gotten way better.
Yeah.
So also the rest intervals now are like, it's fine.
Yeah.
Also the whole idea of rest interval has mentally shifted a lot, because now when I'm panting, it's like, that's normal.
Yeah.
And it used to be that when I just did gym workouts, panting is like, no, I'm not recovered. But there's actually a mental component there. And research also finds that most people over-rest a little bit. So there's mental recovery essentially. And before that, your muscles might be recovered, but you still feel kind of systemically unrecovered. So most people, when they ultra-regulate, they rest a little bit too much, which is fine. It's not an issue. But if you're going for maximum time efficiency, you can push yourself to be on the shorter end of how much rest you would like.
So definitely doing complementary cardiovascular activity can help with improving recovery time.
If you're just doing it for the gym purpose, then I would say it's better to just shorten your rest intervals gradually a little bit, because you can also get the cardio stimulus from just shortening the rest intervals. And there are some studies that have looked at this where people can get used to shorter rest intervals and they can still get the same volume in with the shorter rest intervals as long as they do it progressively. So actively doing cardio sessions just to improve your, how much rest you need to take in the gym is not very time efficient. But it would be a benefit if you're doing cardio for health reasons or other purposes.
Would you recommend people do that? Like, for example, like one high intensity interval training session per week?
For health, yeah, I think that's also something I've changed my mind a little bit on. If you're lean, good diet, you do strength training multiple times per week, and especially if you do full body type workouts with combo sets, which are inherently more demanding from a cardiovascular point of view than, the average split, there's very little to gain from doing cardio, but there's some. It also depends on your step count. Research has found that all of these things basically compete to some degree for the same health benefits. In the end, it's just physical activity and blood flow. To a large extent. Now, you're not going to get maximum health because you won't get your VO2 max up with that type of exercise. It's going to increase a little bit. It's going to be better than an untrained individual. But if you want like perfect health, then you would have to do some higher intensity cardio along with that.
One of the studies was saying 7,000 was a sweet spot for steps.
Yeah. So a recent meta-analysis found that for most people, the benefits diminish very, very sharply once you go over like 7K steps per day. Step count's a very rough marker, right? Because you could do a long walk or you could stay active the whole day. And there's also some research that suggests it's actually more important to be active a little bit the whole day.
Neat. Yeah.
So
where does the 10,000 come from?
There was some research hinting at that. And really, you can't go wrong with it. It's definitely not unhealthy.
More, just do more.
Exactly.
If you do 7,000, like, okay, well, I don't need to do any more.
I think if you do 10,000 for the days you don't get to 10,000. So if you do 5 times a week, you do 10,000, then the other days you travel, you do less. So the average is out a little bit.
Yes.
So workouts, hypertrophy is number 1 or number 2 reasons why people work out.
Yeah.
The second one is metabolism and fat loss and fat burning. So I want to talk about the myth around slow metabolism. Is it a myth? Does it exist? Do people have slow metabolism? Can you speed it up?
Yeah, it definitely exists. People differ in their rate of metabolism. So energy expenditure is mostly what people talk about, and especially resting energy expenditure is kind of like your base metabolic rate. How fast that is, it doesn't vary that much between individuals. So most people, when they say they have a faster metabolism, they have a more adaptive metabolism, or they're just more active. So generally we see that the people always have this anecdote of like, oh, this person, they eat whatever they want. It's like, yeah, when they go to a restaurant, they eat a lot. But then when they go home, one girl I actually just asked this the other week. And she was saying, like, I have a very fast metabolism. I can eat whatever I want. I just don't get fat. It's actually an issue. Like, I want to gain some weight, but it's just not happening. And then when she went to a restaurant, yeah, she would eat a lot. But then I asked her, what do you eat for lunch? It's like, yeah, a plate of vegetables. It's like, with what? Just a plate of vegetables.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, that's why you're lean, right? What do you do for exercise? Oh yeah, I do this and I do this and I do that. I walk to there and I go on my bike there. It's like, yeah. So even though you don't think you're involved in a lot of structured exercise, actually you do have a pretty high activity level. You see that very often. So I research just someone's activity level and eating habits being by far the number 1, are the biggest determinants of how lean someone is. Metabolic rate also, even if you have a fast metabolic rate, typically people also have a higher appetite, because they're both regulated by your thyroid. Mm-hmm. If you give someone thyroid medication, for example, yeah, their metabolic rate goes up a lot, but their appetite also goes up, and they actually typically don't lose a lot of fat.
How often do you find in those scenarios where you get people coming to you and they say, no matter what, I can't get this outcome?
Right. It's so like 80% of my clients.
Yeah, they'll say, oh, no matter how healthy I eat, or like I stick to my macros religiously, or I train hard in the gym. Out of all of those people, how many of them actually have something genetics related that is actually preventing them from reaching their goal?
Maybe 1%.
Yeah.
It's exceptionally rare. And like I said, this is probably the majority of my clients that come to me and they say, I've tried everything, I can't lose fat.
Yeah, and
I say,
you have not. There's something you're missing.
Exactly.
And the number one thing is, you think you eat good until you start writing down what you eat.
Yes.
Yeah.
The moment you start writing down what you eat, this is an extra 500-600 calories every single. I mean, I'm from myself. I was like, I'm eating 2,200 calories a day. Until I start writing it down, I'm like at 3,000 by lunchtime. What just happened? That shake at 700 calories? Like what? Like that is the approach. So from a metabolism perspective, I think your point is there might be differences, but they're not as big as people claim to be, and you can speed up your metabolism. Now, if we go back to the workout split, in the workout splits we talked about HIIT, and HIIT being probably good for your heart health, but not for hypertrophy. Now, what could be good for your metabolism to add to your workout split, except for, the daily walks? Mm-hmm. Is it a cardio pre or post? Is it a separate session? How would you approach it? Like, what's a golden rule for that?
Typically, I wouldn't even be so worried about increasing your metabolic rate much to begin with. I would be much more concerned with decreasing energy intake. So we see that energy intake is by far the number 1 factor.
So eat less.
People. Yeah, exactly. Eat fewer calories, because you typically want to eat more food.
Yes.
So yeah, you eat less. I know what you mean.
Yeah.
But when you tell people eat less, it's like smoke less. And they're like, they don't know what to do. They just try to eat less of the same foods. And that doesn't work, because they get hungry. They lose fat. They get even hungrier, because the leaner you get, the slower your metabolism gets, the higher your appetite gets. It's not sustainable. Mm-hmm. So you have to change your eating habits. That really is the number 1 thing. And then most people don't even strictly need to exercise to get lean. It's much easier if you do exercise, and especially if you do strength training, because if you do want to increase your metabolic rate, by far the best way to actually achieve that is to increase your lean body mass. So fat-free mass can be increased substantially by going to the gym, lifting weights, building muscle mass. And that in the long term does actually make a substantial difference. And that's why we also see in studies that, if anything, meta-analyses that have compared strength training to cardio, strength training actually results in more fat loss in the longer term studies because they increase their metabolic rate. And the cardio is just like a one-time investment. Yeah, you do some cardio, you burn some energy, you can either exercise a bit more or eat a little bit less. The end result is the same. But the building of muscle mass is like a long-term investment into your metabolism. So typically you actually see that those people have a slight edge in the research.
So all those people who are on a Stairmaster for an hour every single day, they should probably just, replace some of the carbs with fiber, or have maybe a little bit less fat instead of doing that 1 hour, because overall that will be much stronger impact towards their goal than that Stairmaster.
Yes, for sure. Focus on your diet first. And then probably if you're going to the gym that much, switch some of those sessions out to strength training. Especially if you're doing like strength training, full body workouts with combo sets, energy expenditure will not even be that different from a cardio session, especially for longer sessions, because you get the highest energy expenditure with like HIIT, so high intensity interval training, but you cannot do an hour-long interval training session. Like you're destroyed, especially if you're untrained in 10, 20 minutes. So strength training, you can actually do pretty well for an hour plus. And then if you look at the total energy expenditure from the session, it's really not very different. So you get the same acute effect, and then you build muscle mass, which is the long-term investment, and you often end up a little bit better long-term.
If we talk a little about lean bulking, I think there's a lot of questions about how much of a calorie surplus do you need to be in order to put on muscle tissue? Because I've seen even some people stating that you can do it. Well, if you're a complete beginner, you could technically still build muscle in a calorie deficit, and also you can still build muscle whilst being at maintenance. And most people, I think, are largely now saying that if you're, above 300, 400 calorie surplus consistently on a day-to-day basis, that's just a recipe for fat accumulation quite quickly.
Yes. For natural lifters, there's a very small energy surplus that will be productively used for muscle growth, because you just realistically will not build that much muscle mass. Like the net metabolizable energy density of a kilo of muscle mass, even factoring in all the other energy it takes, is like 2,500 calories or so by most estimates. So it's really not a lot of energy that you have to put into the body. And then there's some metabolic inefficiency and stuff that goes on top of it, but it's not a lot. Divide by 80 or divide by 30, you get something like 80 calories or something, right? So it's maybe 100 calories a day energy surplus that really can be used to accelerate your metabolism and build muscle mass, theoretically. And then if you look at the studies, indeed, we see that people with higher energy surpluses, they mostly just gain more fat. There is an increase in muscle growth in some of the research, but it's very small. So you get the dreamer bulk, where this is the first surplus, and this can be used for muscle growth. All that goes into muscle. And then for the rest of the surplus, your muscle growth goes from here to like here. And all of this is
fine. Which is that happens with most people.
Yes.
Yeah. I guess it's just really hard to try and pinpoint the sweet spot.
Yes, that's the issue.
Because if you don't get to quite that amount of surplus, then if we're talking just 100 calories, there may be a day when you just do a little bit more walking than you would do typically.
Yes.
And then before you know it, you're actually now in a bit of a deficit.
Yep.
What advice would you give to those people to try and find the sweet spot? Yeah,
typically you have to try to be accurate, and more accurate you are, the leaner you can do your bulk. For advanced lifters, my experience is that at a certain level of advancement, recomposition is not happening anymore. And then they need to be in a surplus. And there's also a big pitfall where people that have gotten lean and they've become addicted to becoming lean, they never bulk anymore. I did that myself for many years. They don't gain anything anymore. You can do that. You can do your exercise, you can get your protein in, but you're just not gaining muscle mass anymore. And then in that case, bulking and accepting that there will be some fat gain, because you're just going to have to overshoot that theoretical 100 calorie or so energy surplus. That's just going to happen. You don't know your exact maintenance energy intake, and it varies per day, and your energy intake also varies. So you're just going to have to go by your body composition data. Make sure that you are gaining weight at the lowest rate, basically, that is feasible for you to control. And then you don't want to see...
What would that weekly average be?
if you're getting like 0.5% weight per week, you're doing it really well. And for most people, it's more like 0.2, 0.3. So you're really talking about just any positive number. And you have to look at the averages from the week. Otherwise, you can't even see it.
Add every day, divide by 7.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because if you're not using a rolling average or just comparing the averages of 1 week to the next, you're going to think you're at maintenance. Mm-hmm. That's how slow the muscle growth is.
Yeah.
And there will in some weeks be an increase in caliper measurements or your circumference measurements or something, but it should not be constant. If you see that you're barely gaining weight, but your skin folds are increasing steadily week to week, that's a bad sign, right? Yeah. Then there's a bad ratio of fat to muscle there.
Yeah, I did that over the past 2 months. So there's been no traveling. The training has been absolutely dialed in, like proper programming. And instead of being like restrictive with what I'm eating, I'm just like letting myself eat when I'm hungry. Mm-hmm. And I've noticed for the first time in a long time, like the strength went up massively.
Yeah.
I definitely felt like fuller. I mean, you can argue at this stage if I'm actually bigger or not. I feel like I've just stayed the same, over the past couple of years. There's not really much more that I can add, but definitely being in that surplus, and we're talking a comfortable surplus consistently. Like strength and PRs every week.
Yeah. There's also just staying at a very low body fat level because you're generally very lean, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you stay very, very lean for a long period of time, it does start to take its toll.
Yeah.
Both on connective tissues, hormonal environment.
Mm-hmm.
So there's also just a component of the body fat percentage itself.
Mm-hmm. I think a lot of people would just assume, oh yeah, you're always shredded. I'm like, no, right now I'm probably 15% body fat, 16.
Yeah.
But just because of the way everything is proportional with the distribution of the body fat, and then obviously the pump, the muscle mass and the shadows, like it gives off the illusion that I'm still extremely lean, which
most people have a very skewed idea in general of what 10% is. 10% is pretty shredded.
Yeah.
And most people that think they think that when they start seeing a little bit of abdominal definition come in, they think they're close to 10%.
Yeah.
It's like, no, you're probably more close to 15 at that point.
Yeah.
Speaking about from a nutrition perspective and surplus perspective, there's two things that 3, 4, 5 years ago was like in everybody's mind, everybody's talking about it, and it kind of slipped away. So number one is intermittent fasting. 16 and 8, the whole approach is it should be 14, wouldn't even do it. And the second one is cheat day, just from a restorage perspective, but also allowing your body to know it's not going to die from starvation. So on those 2 points, and I was in the camp, I would fast every Monday completely, and I wouldn't eat breakfast, and my first meal would be at lunch, so the 16-8 approach. And then on Sundays, I would go absolutely ham. I mean, we're talking about 10, 12, 15,000 calories. I mean, the stuff that I would do, I would have 2 burgers while I'm having burgers, ordering pizza while pizza is done, having ice cream, getting popcorn, and falling asleep with Snickers on a Sunday because I knew on Monday I wouldn't eat. Like the stuff, like, when The Rock posts like his pancakes.
The epic cheat meal, yeah.
I'm like, that's lunch.
That's lunch, dude.
Yeah.
That's lunch. And obviously I went away from both of them. I neither do the cheat days anymore, nor do the intermittent fasting, just based on a data set. But is that a personal thing, or does the data support that there's a change there?
Consistency typically works better in research. So people in general that are the most consistent, and this goes for most things in life actually, people that are most consistent, they do better. People have very stable lifestyle, stable sleep pattern, eat at similar hours, train at similar hours. In fact, very often, in most cases, eat the same thing every day, especially when you're looking at athletes. They do very well. And people that diverge from that in any way, typically they do worse. Now, you could do intermittent fasting, but then it should be consistent. So you can do 16-8. Every day you fast 16 hours. Can work super well. It's not better. It's not worse. It's just a way for some people to control energy intake. And research has found that it works well when you do it at hours that you're not biologically wired to be hungry. Some people always hungry when they wake up. Some people not hungry. Me, I'm not hungry when I wake up. So for me, if I eat breakfast, it increases my energy intake if I don't actively try to control it afterwards. And research has found that when you basically force feed breakfast, because it's the most important meal of the day, an early breakfast at least, because breakfast just means breaking the fast, it works adversely. But when you're consistent with it, in the end, it's just energy intake versus energy expenditure. Now, cheat meals, very popular, and I'm going to upset a lot of people with this, but they typically do not have a good track record in research. Most people that have like weekends where they gonna go off the rails, it has a lot of psychological downsides. And what we think in bodybuilding circles is normal, has actually in research now been labeled characteristic of an eating disorder.
Mhm.
Because if you go to a psychologist and you tell them what you just said, they're going to be like, you have an eating disorder. Right? And we think it's normal in bodybuilding circles. But if you really think about it, it's not natural, right? That's not a natural way anybody would ever eat. If you don't tell them about calories and anything, nobody would end up with that eating schedule. So with bodybuilding, we've always, we're drawn to the extremes and we like to experiment. But those strategies, they have a lot of downsides. And one particular downside is that if Sunday is your pancake day, then Monday to Saturday become your thinking about pancake day days, right? Exactly what you said in the reverse as well. When you know that you have a 24-hour fast coming up, most people compensate for that and they eat more beforehand.
Overeating,
When they start a diet, they're like, I'm going to start a diet next week.
On Monday.
So let me get really fat.
Yeah. So for example, most people doing Ramadan fasting, they don't lose fat.
Yeah.
Well, okay. Well, that's a little bit different because the eating window is from 11 o'clock at night, 3 o'clock in the morning with lots of sugar.
Yes. So that's the thing. They compensate. So you would think that suddenly you get people to fast the whole time the sun is up, right? They're going to lose fat. In most cases, if they do something a little bit, when people start doing that in a Western society, they do lose fat because they just decrease energy intake. But with Ramadan fasting, they know it's coming, it's a real thing, and then afterwards they eat a lot of sugary food and the like.
Incredible,
and they end up not losing fat.
I was sitting, and the first thing at the fast, the way to break the fast is sweets.
The dates.
It's the first thing after, let's say, 17, 18 hours of fasting, they get sugar in their system. And I'm like, everybody who's done a fasting, you should start with, boiled eggs or something that, your stomach can handle. And I'm like, that is and if they've been doing this from childhood on, so they completely obviously adjusted to that. But for me, this was like very, very interesting to see from a cultural perspective because it was not something I was used to.
Yeah. The Japanese, in terms of how close their cultural habits, because of course there's a culture component here and the like, but in terms of how well the culture aligns with a scientifically optimized eating strategy, the Japanese actually have it best. So their Japanese eating strategy, for those that don't know with sushi, is that you start with the least palatable food. So like white fish, and then you move up to tuna, which has some more flavor, and then you go up to the fatty fish, the more colored, the salmon and the like. And you start with the food, miso also. You start with those things, more savory, more salty, and then you move up to things that are more sweet and more sugary. And that's ideal because if you just think about broccoli soup, after a long fast, broccoli soup tastes amazing.
Incredible.
Yeah, so you just start with that, great. But after you've had the sweets, you don't want the broccoli soup anymore, right? So filling yourself up as much as possible with broccoli soup beforehand while you still like that works better. And then you're still going to enjoy the sweets. But the reverse, it doesn't work that way. So you end up eating a lot more because now you have the sweets. You don't want the broccoli soup anymore. And now you fill up all your appetite units with higher calorie foods.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's an interesting thing which I experienced with cheat meals. I used to do it for so long, for years. There would be the Sunday, which would be the all-in, eat as much as possible, usually garbage. And then what I would try and do is with that surplus that I was in, which would mostly be impossible to calculate because when you have a cheat meal, most of the time there's no macros shown on that cheat meal, and you're not going to sit down and calculate everything.
How much is this cake?
Yeah. So what I would try and do is offset that giant surplus that I was in by being in a pretty heavy deficit every other day throughout the week.
Yeah.
And I just noticed that during the week would suck, particularly the following days after the cheat meal itself. I would just get more depleted, just feel more tired. Workouts would suffer. And then I would start fantasizing about the cheat day again because I'm in that deficit. And I noticed not only was it a pain in the ass during the week and everything suffered during the week, but then my body composition as a whole didn't actually look that great. Especially on the Monday, I was so inflamed and bloated and just looked terrible.
Yeah, your face blows up. Yeah.
And then by the end of the week, by Saturday, I was just very flat, very depleted, and just almost a little bit gaunt looking.
So basically, if it's better to have one small dessert a day than a whole cake on Sunday. I mean, that's the main takeaway here.
Yeah. There's also research on how the brain perceives reward, that the traditional way of eating a dessert after you're already full, there's less change in reward pathways. Whereas the first thing you eat after a long fast, your brain is like, oh, we want more of this. Like, this is good.
A quick one before we move on to supplementation. From a food perspective, there is this theory, and there's two sides to this theory. One theory is you shouldn't eat before going to bed at least 2 hours to have no insulin spike, to lower your glucose, to allow your growth hormone to release. And then there's a second one, and Andy Galpin discussed it also on the podcast, is where it's actually, hey, no, if you have, they call it the cheese. What was that? There was this cheese sandwich. There's a theory of a cheese sandwich. So if you eat a cheese sandwich right before going to bed, the satiation of the cheese and the peptides and protein in the cheese and the comfort food will actually calm you down and make you sleep better. So there's a psychological approach to food and also the ingredients of the food to impact your sleep. But then the other side is what actually goes chemically on in your body. What does the research says to you? Should we eat before going to bed? Or if we do eat, is it as bad as we think it is?
It's mostly what you're used to. So in the best controlled research, we find that it doesn't really matter. Even sleep quality is not affected. I used to eat right before going to bed, and I got used to that. But now I don't. And if I now eat right before going to bed, I'm like, oh, I'm very full. Especially with sushi, when it's like a huge calorie meal. But as long as you're used to anything, you can pretty much sleep. And when you notice your subjective sleep quality is good, you're probably fine. So in that sense, do whatever works for you. If you want to optimize or get like a starting point, research finds that on average, people sleep best when they have their meal 2 to 4 hours before bed. Like many people do have some issue eating, especially larger meals right before bed. And typically we see some trends for higher protein, higher carb meals to work better. But again, it's mostly what you're used to. So
I think the type of food can also make a difference. This is just from my experience.
Yes.
So I could, for example, have an omelette or eggs or fish, mashed potato, very soon to go into bed.
Yeah, low FODMAP.
And it usually doesn't really impact my sleep.
But if you have a steak,
yes, it's red meat.
Yeah, red meat. There's something about red meat which impacts sleep quality so strongly.
Yeah. So I think the foods can make a big difference.
Yeah, there's research and
also
composition.
I think as well, like how full you are. So let's say, for example, if you'd eaten a lot that day, you weren't really that hungry, and then for whatever reason you just force-fed yourself some more food, and you go into bed, you're like, you're feeling really full, but you could have very little throughout the day, but have a big meal in the evening. But for whatever reason, because you haven't eaten much throughout that day, you just don't have that same full feeling.
Yeah, and it may be even be more beneficial to you because you don't feel hungry going to bed because of that.
Yeah.
So from the growth hormone release perspective, you think there's an impact?
Again, mostly what you're used to, probably. Because growth hormone production can also change. So I don't think it's a big deal.
Okay. Let's move on. Supplementation. Topic that we're very familiar with. Let's say you go into standard pharmacy and you can pick 3 of them. What's the 3 that you would start with from a stack perspective? If at all. Or if you're one of the proponents who says that you can get everything you need from food, then that's also welcome.
You can theoretically get anything you need from food, pretty much. Creatine is one of the only things that's not realistic to get from food, and it does work for most people. About a third of people is essentially a non-responder, which I am one of. So,
to creatine?
Yeah. So I notice nothing.
You don't notice anything, but your blood results change.
Also not really.
So you have...
I think
receptors
creatinine, I haven't really checked if that goes up.
Yeah.
But it's often high from strength training anyway, because I do blood work from high protein and then a workout and you do blood work. Creatinine might be up, doesn't mean anything.
If people don't respond, how many people are not responding?
It's about a third. It's a continuum, and it depends on how much natural saturation you have of your creatine stores. So the best way to check is, does your weight go up after you start taking it, especially when you do a loading phase? And does your work capacity go up? And if you notice no increase in your repetitions or your weight, then you're at least not a high responder. The people that complain the most are actually having an ultimate luxury problem. They're like, I'm starting creatine. I'm like, I'm up 2 kilos. Yeah. It's like, that's awesome. Like, what are you complaining about? Yeah. It's all in your muscles. Like, you just gained 2 kilos of fat-free mass. Like,
I think that might be me,
I know. We discussed that. He started recently. It's like, dude, creatine works. I'm like, yes, it's the most researched supplement out there.
Because when we were speaking about last time, I'd been basically staying away from it because of that one study about hair loss, which apparently was just a load of nonsense. So okay, let me give it a try. Because Bionic started doing it. I was like, well, it's there. Let me start having it. And then I have, like, definitely it's made a difference.
And then the whole research, I mean, it feels like last 9 months, like creatine, it was like the new big thing. I'm like, it's been around forever.
Yeah.
But now if women are start taking it, 5 grams is not enough. Like you should take, 0.1 gram per kilogram. Like it's cognitive benefits. And like the whole world is waking up. So I'm very sorry for you that you're not a responder. It's really good. Yeah. Okay, so creatine. What are the two?
Vitamin D is probably one of the other ones that is just exceptionally hard these days to get enough of. Because you need to get it from the sun, and most people don't get a lot of sun exposure. If you don't get enough sun exposure to basically be tanned most of the year, you probably would benefit from supplementing vitamin D.
The one thing that I can add here from vitamin D perspective, just from a dosage perspective, because we see that on our blood test results, people underestimate how much they need.
Yes.
I mean, 2,000 IUs is not going to even get you to 35, 40. Yep. You're talking about 5,000 IUs plus for most people. We have people taking 8,000 plus IUs and still being suboptimal.
Yeah.
So when people think about I'm taking vitamin D, you need to do blood work with that, because that's one of the things where absorption levels are so low for most people.
Yeah. So one thing that also matters a lot is you have to take it with a high-fat meal.
Yes.
Many people don't. And then indeed, it can double the dosage you need.
Yeah.
So some people, they take it first thing in the morning, fasted, and then they need like 8K. And then when they start taking it with a fatty meal, they might only need 4K.
Yeah.
On average, people need about 4K to be in the optimal range. But yeah, I know even one girl, for example, that needs to take 10K just to be at like even the low end of good levels. So there's a big variance there as well. And blood work really is ideal. Like most people, this is like the official guideline. It's not even me saying this. Like you should do blood work every year. It's one of the best things you could do. Most people guess so much, they spend so much on supplements. But please just spend that money on, it's like 1 month of supplements for most people.
Yeah.
Do a blood test. See what the numbers actually are. And you'll see, do you need iron or do you have actual iron toxicity? For men, that's actually more common. And it makes a big difference. And with vitamin D as well. Maybe you're at 200, maybe you're at 30.
Yeah, well, at 200, you would know. You would know your face color would change. Third one,
probably omega 3s. I would go with omega 3s. If you get them from a good brand, which there aren't a lot of, then it's one of the supplements that has a lot of benefits for people that don't eat a lot of fish, which is most people again. So there's just some benefit for fat loss, some benefit for muscle growth, strength development, brain health, inflammation, skin health, joint health. So many small benefits that it's just one of the supplements I would put like very high up there. Only downside is it's quite expensive. And research has found that in independent lab work, the vast majority of the supplements, and this goes for most supplements in general, don't contain what's on the label.
Yeah,
and the omega-3, even worse, is often oxidized, which completely defeats the point of taking it because it becomes inflammatory instead of anti-inflammatory. Like you're literally paying for poison in that case. So with omega-3s, even more than most supplements, it's really important that you get it from like a well-reputed lab. And ideally, you look at some independent lab work that says, yeah, this stuff actually has what's on the label and nothing more.
On one of the studies which you posted on your page, quite an interesting headline, which was electrolyte supplements are overrated and potentially harmful.
Yes.
What's that about?
So if you look at public health guidelines, they've basically condemned high sodium intakes forever. And they've gone a bit overboard with that. And now on social media, the perspective has basically shifted to the complete opposite end, that somehow people are deficient in sodium. And that's just not true either. So the truth is a little bit in the middle there. Most people consume enough sodium, for sure. If anything, you're a little bit on the high end, but it's not a big deal for most people. If you're not eating a lot of processed food with smoked chicken breast every day with 3 grams of sodium, or in Spain, you have this water that has like 1 gram of sodium per bottle. It's like, that's insane. But if you don't have those weird foods or processed foods, most people's sodium intake is just on the fine end. And they certainly don't need more though. And most electrolyte supplements really are just sodium with a bunch of trace minerals in there. It's like mineral salt, like it's just sodium with some trace minerals. Like it doesn't make a big difference.
Would you agree though, it might be necessary if you have a more active lifestyle and sweat a lot?
You have to sweat a lot. And most people automatically also increase their fluid intake and their intake of food and also salty food. So it's auto-regulated to some extent. But it's indeed people that do endurance training, people that sweat enormous amounts, those are more likely to need it. That's also where the original Gatorade and the like, they come from, like marathon runners, right? Those are the people. If you're running a marathon under the burning sun, yes, you probably benefit from some electrolyte supplementation. if you're just going to the gym 3 times a week and you sit at home the whole day, you don't need to slam 3 grams of sodium in the morning. Because
what we're seeing is there's people who don't drink water anymore at all. They only drink electrolyte drinks, and that I think that's not the purpose of it. The purpose of it is my personal guidelines is when I travel, so when I fly after an airplane, if I go out, then the morning after electrolytes, and obviously from a really intense session, that's probably the 3 times I'm definitely going to drink electrolytes. It's part of my routine. But those people who do that, like there's girls sitting on the couch in front of the TV drinking electrolyte drinks, thinking they're doing something good for their body. That's absolutely not the case.
Yeah. Ketogenic diets are also a niche where they have more application because ketosis increases sodium excretion. So
regular sauna use, I guess.
Yeah, could also increase it. But again, you can also get it from food, right? You don't need electrolyte supplements for that. You can
absolutely. Pink Himalayan salt. You just add that. I mean, in the morning, pink Himalayan salt with a slice of lemon with warm water. Yeah, that's like the natural approach to go.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I would say that for most people, when you go over like 2 grams of sodium a day, the research is pretty compelling that the risk of cardiovascular disease goes up via increased blood pressure. It's not a huge effect, but blood pressure is one of the silent killers that is a really big deal for a lot of people. Like a lot of people have high blood pressure these days. And my blood pressure, if I don't control it well, is also on the high end. And I'm doing like almost everything well. There's a big genetic component there. So
there's some people who are apparently saltier sweaters than other people.
Yes, there's a big difference there. So even when you're sweating a lot, ideally you would test it, but it's very complicated to test.
Brian Johnson did a recent video on his sauna use experimentation, and
where he iced his balls.
Yeah, and I think he was mentioning how there are some people who sweat, but when they do sweat, a lot of sodium comes out.
Yes,
and their need for electrolyte supplementation is higher versus those people that aren't salty sweaters, which is quite interesting.
The blood pressure monitoring thing, I think we had Simon Hill last time on, and he mentioned that 3 markers that he's checking upon regularly is actually the blood pressure aspect. He's like almost does it daily. And that crossed my mind. I haven't done it. I only do blood pressure when I'm going to see a doctor because it's mandatory before seeing a doctor to do the blood pressure part. Is that something you would incorporate into your daily life? Is that important? Is it like a certain age when you have to do it or certain activity levels that you should double check on it? I
would check it with your annual blood work, yes.
So once a year.
It should. It's not in blood work, and also many doctors don't do it, but it absolutely should. It's a super strong predictor of cardiovascular health and mortality.
But would you, okay, again, those devices cost a couple $100s at most, right? Would something of those things would be like you do it at home, or then you become just a little bit overstimulated by data then that?
Yeah, I think for most people, if you do it once a year and it's fine, then you're probably fine.
Okay.
If it's not fine, then it's probably a good idea to get the monitor. Also because you might have white coat hypertension, which I also have, which basically means that the first time you measure it, it's very high. And it's just the setting. And like if you tell me to relax in a doctor's office, I'm not fully relaxed. Like I'm never going to be fully
What's it called?
Relaxed.
White coat?
White coat hypertension. Because
I know exactly what you mean, but
yeah.
Like fear of public speaking in that case, like something similar.
Yeah, basically like that. But it doesn't even seem to be completely fear related. It's just like some people are a little bit more type A, so they're like always somewhat wired, right? And some people you can put them anywhere, they're just completely relaxed. Yeah. For me, if I'm watching a series, which should be engaging, my blood pressure typically goes down. You start monitoring it. Especially when I'm looking at the monitor the first time, it will be higher, and then if I don't look at it, you just keep measuring it. It goes down, 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 down. So that's something to check if it is high. Yeah. But you don't need to like check it every week or so.
Last question on recovery before we round it up. Sleep, and the importance of sleep, and data on sleep, and volume of sleep. What's your thoughts there?
Massive. Sleep is massively important. I mean, I recently had a couple occasions where I didn't sleep as well. And every time I don't, I'm remembered of just how important it is. When you really have your life dialed in and you have perfect sleep every day, for me, it's like compared to when I don't have that, it's like I have superpowers. It's not just fitness. In research, we see 50% differences in fat loss and muscle growth. 50%, right?
50.
Yes, that is massive. Like the difference in nutrient partitioning is massive. So if you're on a cut and you're maybe well rested, you mostly lose fat. Sleep goes down, you start losing substantially more lean body mass. There have been multiple studies that found like real effects, even like 1 hour less per night really substantial.
It's funny
effects.
because some people are waking up an hour earlier to go to the gym to do cardio, and it's like you probably would have been better off just having an extra hour sleep.
Yeah,
not doing any cardio.
Yeah, I mean, if it's the only exercise, especially for cardio, indeed. But if it's like the only time you get to the gym, then it depends, right? But
I mean, I think that the point is like the extra hour. So you would have gone at 9 and do or 8 and do a lifting session.
Yeah, that doesn't.
But now
make
you
sense.
come at 7 to do an extra hour, and you wake up, and then you just
No, that's ironic because indeed many people have this idea that the morning is better. Like, and if you want to be productive, you wake up at 4. No, you wake up at 3. No, you wake up at 2. Like, you just don't sleep at all. Like, that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
Like, and I think the idea comes from people like Arnold Schwarzenegger and Elon Musk that are so driven. They don't need sleep. Because under any circumstance, they would sleep on the floor. They would work the whole day, every day, nonstop. But for most mortals, it's not like that.
Definitely wired. Yeah.
Sleep, your willpower, appetite goes down, willpower goes up, nutrient partitioning improves, inflammation levels go down. Everything in your life improves. In fact, if you just look at it from a happiness perspective, there are really very few things in life you can do that make a meaningful difference in your overall happiness. Making more money, for example, you have to make a lot more money to have like a small effect. Yeah. Making more friends, easier said than done. So for most of these things, there are just not a lot of things that will make you from like a 7 to an 8 in terms of happiness. Sleep is one of them. If you're constantly sleep deprived, it's a meaningful deterioration of your overall quality of life.
Yeah. So data-wise, 6.5, 7 hours, what's the minimum amount?
The ideal amount is that you wake up naturally feeling refreshed every day.
That's not what the audience wants to hear. The audience wants to hear.
You're not a big fan of the trackers, are you?
No. So 5 sleep cycles is basically the kind of the scientific answer. For most people, that's 7.5 hours. Sleep cycles are around 90 minutes, although it varies across the night. You could split it up if you want, but it needs to be at regular hours. So basically 7.5 hours at regular times for most people. Older people need a bit less. If you're not waking up naturally yourself, you need more sleep. That's really what it comes
split up. You mean power nap in the afternoon?
Power nap, you don't get deep sleep, so it does help a lot, but you don't get the full restoration of deeper sleep. So you need to sleep a full sleep cycle to get that effect, which is like an hour and a half or so.
The biggest improvement I've noticed for me and better sleep is being extremely strict with when I go to bed.
Yes.
Like making sure this is when I need to be in bed, relaxing for an hour, and then this is when I need to be out.
Which is 11?
Well, I didn't say I was good at it. I would say because I'm usually waking up on average, it's between 8 and 9.
Mm-hmm.
So if I sleep between 12 and 1, that's good. But there'll be some times throughout the week where I have an event to go to. I got to go downtown, or I'm on a date, and then that goes out the window. I go to sleep at like 2 or 3, and I'm the type of person that I can't sleep in. Mm-hmm. Like for whatever reason, I'm always waking up naturally at that time.
Yeah.
And
the more you get, the more you get.
The moment I am awake, I'm automatically thinking about the day. I can't just snooze off again. So it's, if I have gone to bed late, no matter what, I'm going to wake up at that time. And as you said, like it's just, that day is hard. Everything is hard. Gym is hard. Willpower, non-existent. Mood, depressed.
Appetite higher. Eat more carbs.
Yes.
Can't make big decisions. Like it's difficult. So you got to have that discipline.
Menno, thank you so much for your time, man. It was appreciated.
My pleasure.
Really, really interesting conversation. Thanks for sharing a lot of data at the end of ones, but also incorporating things that the audience wanted to hear in terms of what's really working and what should be the goal of hypertrophy, metabolism improvement, recovery. But most importantly, listen to your body, do the regular checkups, understand what goes on inside of you. So truly appreciate it. For the audience going forward, where can they find more about you?
Mostly Instagram and YouTube at menno.henselmans.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Thank you.